This podcast is rated E for explicit and by category of true crime contains language and descriptions of crimes not suitable for young or sensitive listeners. The search for Tawnya Knight's killer or killers is marred by time and lies. Tawnya's mother, Lori, shares her thoughts with Amy before the crew gives their opinions on all the possibilities. This is part 3 of Tawnya Knight, Someone Knows, and this is the Cold Case Chronicles.
I know your secret, I know the truth, I know your secrets and I'm telling on you.
I think also I kind of see myself in her a little bit. My parents probably didn't know who my friends were. The whole thing about her leaving the Haney's house and walking home didn't make sense to me because I know that when I was that age, if I had said I was staying out, I would have made sure I stayed out. It doesn't really ring true to me that she would actually be walking to her house. So there's a lot of questions that I've written down for you, but if you will just kind of tell me, start from the beginning, like, okay, so you and Frank were married in Kansas, correct?
Right. We was married back in Kansas. We lived in Willsville for a little bit, then moved to Gardner and then to Olathe. Him and I split up and divorced. I came out here, I think in 82, and then throughout the years, he would pay for them to go back to Kansas in the summertime, and then they'd come back here for school. One year, my oldest son, Chris, decided he wanted to live with Dad. So I let him go back there. Things blew up. Judy caused a lot of problems. So Chris came back. So in 96, Tawnya said, hey, I want to go try living with Dad. I said, okay. Well, she did good that year in school and everything. And she came out that following summer. She wanted to go back for another year. So I said, sure, because you're doing good. And so she went back there, and that was the last time I'd seen her.
So tell me a little bit more about Judy. Now, she has another daughter. Did she have that daughter going into the marriage?
She had that daughter going into the marriage. That's Amber.
Okay. And how much age difference is between her and Tawnya?
I think they might be around the same age.
Did they get along very well?
Well, see, when I left there, both of them were just toddlers.
Right.
And Judy lived across the street at the time at her parents' house, across the street from us. And we were best friends for several years. But I know throughout the years of all the kids going back to Kansas to spend the summer with their dad, Amber would cause a lot of problems. She would do something, but my kids always got the blame for it and got in trouble for it because Judy made sure that when Frank got home, that everything was my kids' fault. They would always complain, and there'd be times, well, the time when Chris went back there to live, I was talking to him on the phone one time, and he was probably, I'd say 15 or so. So Amber was probably 12, 13, maybe 14. She was yelling and screaming in the background, which she did all the time when I would call and talk to the kids. But this time when Chris was living back there, I was talking to him, and Amber was yelling and screaming. He asked her to be quiet because he was talking to me. She started throwing food at him, and he was yelling at her to quit it. Judy come in, and I could hear her. She told him to get off the phone, and Chris said, no, I'm talking to my mom. And she told him if he didn't hang that phone up, she would. So I heard a click, and then a little bit later, he called me. He had taken off. She tried grabbing him. He broke loose, jumped over the railing of the porch, and took off to a friend's house and called me. They had called the cops or something, but when they showed up at that friend's house, Judy blamed everything on my son, Chris.
Now, how long was that before Tawnya went missing?
I would say maybe 2, 3 years, maybe. It's been so long, but something like that just sticks into your mind.
Oh, for sure. I just can't get around the phone call that Bobby said he got. What was her relationship like with Bobby?
As far as I know, she didn't have one. Because, like I said, the last time I was back there was back in '83. And I hadn't even been back there until I went back there and buried Tawnya. And that was in 97.
How did Judy act at the funeral?
That night at the viewing the night before where people can come and everything, she would stand at the back and she would just sob real loud. It was like a fake, to get attention. And then Amber, she was running around, hitting all these boys, flirting with them, laughing and running around through that funeral home. And she was like 13 at the time. You don't do that. That's disrespectful. And I don't even think my kids really even talked to them. At the time I was remarried, that day happened to be my birthday. So my husband at the time took my two boys to the mall to get me a present and bring back to the funeral home. So that was pretty sweet. But
Yeah.
That crap with Judy and Amber, that's another one of those things that just sticks in your head.
Absolutely, it would. With the phone call that Bobby said he originally got, do you know what the investigators found out about that? Like, did they talk to the girl, Carrie, that supposedly received it? Like, how was that confirmed?
I'm not sure, but I did learn from the sheriff's department, either that or the private investigator I hired, that Bobby didn't receive the call. His boss's daughter received a call from a girl and kind of talked like the lingo that Tawnya did, and was saying she was okay. She'd be home when things calmed down with Judy. But she said the girl sounded like Tawnya and talked like Tawnya. Her dad, this girl's dad, didn't want to get involved with the cops. So they had Bobby say that he got the call.
That just doesn't sit right with me.
No.
Like, why would a grown man do that? If Tawnya were to call someone to tell him she was okay, why would it be Carrie? Why wouldn't it have been Steve or Sarah, the people that she supposedly was with? Why would she call this girl that happens to be Bobby's boss's daughter?
Well, it could have been whoever it was making the call knew this girl.
Right.
This Carrie. And also found out from a long time ago that from the sheriff's department that the reason why Bobby agreed to say that he received that phone call was because it was right there at the holidays and he wanted to make Judy feel better. By thinking that Tawnya was okay.
But yet he said that Tawnya wasn't coming home because of her. So that's kind of counterproductive.
Right. That part I never did understand.
Let me go back to when she was found and the whole story with the jacket. So the jacket wasn't found with Tanya's body. They recovered it later. How did they recover it and who recovered it?
From what I've heard, it was taken and it was found, I think, at Elijah's house. But I don't know how they recovered unless they went asking, because they interviewed a lot of people back then. My private investigator, Jeff, doesn't think that he was involved. But from the very beginning, Scott Atwell from the Johnson County Sheriff's Department that was on her case until he retired, he would... See, I never knew no names until I hired this private investigator.
Right.
So in the very beginning, Scott had two people of interest. One was Steve and another one was Elijah. And Elijah, he would call the street smart one. And Steve, he would call the dumb one. And those were his two main people of interest. But then there's also been a lead brought up quite a bit.
Right. And Lee was actually arrested for battery the following year. And which it's really strange that a lot of these people involved have been arrested for battery after she was found. Like their life kind of went downhill, which says a lot. Now, Sarah, she never actually talked to your private investigator, did she?
No, I think maybe once, and she said she would talk to him, but she never really talked to him.
Because I've been trying to find her, and she's just MIA. Like, I can't find her anywhere.
She was right down here in Phoenix, in the suburbs of Phoenix. And then Jeff, my private investigator, told me a couple months ago, it looked like she may have moved to Texas.
Yeah, I saw that she had like a Texas and maybe an Oklahoma address at one time. So she's just kind of all over the place.
Right. And she moved away from Spring Hill shortly after Tawnya was murdered.
Now, where did that Facebook exchange in 2010 come from Sarah and Steve? Where did that surface?
My private investigator got it. And he said he got it from the sheriff's department.
Okay.
Because when Jeff went and talked to the sheriff's department, because it'd been so long, they agreed to let him go through all the files.
Right.
And look at things. But he said that was given to him or something. Anyway, he gave it to me and we posted some of it on Facebook.
I wondered how, like, if they just got it by doing a report on their social media or if Sarah or Steve, one, turned it into them.
That I have no idea. Sometimes it gets so hard and frustrating because with me being over 1,000 miles away, I'm not back there where I can do a lot back there. And being this far, sometimes it's just hard to, get information or make calls. And, I can't go see them in person.
Right.
I do when I make a trip back there.
Well, you're doing a lot. That Facebook page has a lot of information on it. It took many hours to go through, and there was a lot of good information on there. So you're doing a lot. You really are.
We get a lot of support from that because people I don't even know, they like the Facebook and they're that page and
right.
They follow it. And then of course my kids and all, I got a bunch of friends in Kansas. They share it. Wayne's friends share it. Wayne's biker friends.
Mm-hmm.
They plaster it all over. So I get a lot of people helping keep posting it and sharing.
Yeah, it's great because the more information that gets around, the better. And that's kind of why we do the podcast. It's like just to get these cold cases back out there and in the light and have someone else talking about it again. What do you make of the thought that Steve said that Elijah came to his house and took a shower that night?
I don't know if he was lying or telling the truth. There could be some truth in it because more than likely, he could have had blood on him.
Right.
And him and Steve, from what I gather, was kind of close.
Mm-hmm.
Or Steve, I think Steve had a big part in this too. They could have been together and then gone back to Steve's and both of them taken a shower and gotten cleaned up. When I was back there about 3 years ago, I went and I confronted Steve. I went to his house.
Yes, I heard that. I listened to that several times.
And and he bold-faced lied to me on several things, And what was so strange, when I got to the door, I didn't tell him who I was. I said, "Can I talk to you?" He said, "Yeah," and he invited me in. I stepped inside the door and I held a picture of Tawnya up. And I asked him, I said, "Do you know who this is?" And he said that was his best friend, Tawnya. Then I told him I was her mom. He held on to that picture. I showed him one of her, then I showed him one of her casket. Because I said, this is how I visit her now. This is how I know her now. He just held on to it, and I was getting ready to leave, and he's going to put that picture in his wallet. And I said, oh, no, you don't. He has lied so many times. He'd tell the sheriff's department, the detectives there, he would tell them different stories. He told Jeff different stories. But I'm pretty sure he was involved. He knew something.
In her diary, it said that the Friday before she was going to go to Steve's to see Elijah and that she would stay the night at Steve's or Brian's. With her dad, made it sound like that Saturday night was the first time she was able to be out again following her grades being low.
Right. And that's what he had told me, that she had brought her grades up and wanted to go spend the night with a friend. I guess somebody asked it. He couldn't remember one of those interviews. He said he couldn't remember the name. And I think I'd asked him at one time years later. He said, yeah, you can go spend the night. And from what he had told me and the way she was out here, if she was going somewhere and she had a time to be home, she would be home by that time.
So he didn't mention Friday night, that she had stayed out Friday night?
No.
Now, Rachel, her name only comes up when people say that that was where she was probably supposed to stay that night. And was she at the Haney residence at any time, or was she anywhere around?
I don't know who all was over at the Haneys. Jeff had gotten a number for Rachel. And I tried texting her. I told her, I was Tanya's mom, and that I heard that tonight she disappeared, that she was supposed to spend the night, with you. And I was saying, can you just call me or let me talk to you and just ask you a couple questions? She wouldn't do it. Jeff tried texting her, and I think maybe calling her. She wouldn't have anything to do with him. And so 3 years ago, when I was back there in Kansas, we went to her mom's place of work. We was talking to her. She blew up on us because we were harassing her daughter, and her daughter had changed her number now because she was just all upset and everything.
Did you say, I wish someone could harass my daughter, but they can't?
I told that lady, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, if it was your daughter, I bet you'd be doing the same thing, trying to find answers.
I honestly cannot even imagine, and hope I never have to, losing my daughter. I see myself doing exactly what you're doing, going door to door, doing everything you can. I don't see why anyone would expect any different.
If it was an illness or car accident, something like that, you can understand, but when someone just cold-blooded murders someone, and for what? That is hard to digest.
And I'm really surprised that they've been able to keep their mouth shut this long. That I do believe it was more than one person, because I don't think someone could have gotten her over that fence by themselves. But how two people at least have been able to keep their mouth shut this many years without slipping up and saying something to someone is it's just impossible. I feel like more people know what happened, and they just aren't coming forward.
Right. And they could have been threatened, and they could be scared, and Steve, I think instead of him coming out and telling the truth on anything, for once telling the truth, I think after I knew he'd go to the liquor store every day, because I was told that's all he did. And he had bad health problems. And a lot of it was from drinking. He died of cirrhosis. And I think the guilt, it just ate at him. And so, he just drank himself to death instead of facing the consequences.
It really pisses me off that the investigator didn't go to him looking for a deathbed confession, because that's when people just want to get things off their chest. And that would have been the prime opportunity to go ask him some questions one last time.
Yeah. And even right after he died, I even mentioned it to Brian Gressler and the sheriff. I forgot his name now. cocky little thing. But I asked them, I said, I said, did you talk to him anytime, recent before he died? And they said, no. I said, don't you think you could go and talk to his mom or talk to his sisters? I said, see if you can go through his stuff to see if there's something in there before they get rid of it. And a few
Right.
months after he'd already passed away, they hadn't even done that yet.
Now, did they say that they had any DNA from the crime scene?
They haven't told me. I know years ago they had tested some, but as far as if they've done any more, I don't know. I do know last year, it was before December, I was trying to get the sheriff's department to do something to start looking into it. And then that interview with News Channel.
Yes.
Okay, the last one we did where Scott Atwell was interviewed and Jeff, that kind of lit a fire under the sheriff's butt because of that comment he made that he didn't think it was murder.
Right.
And so, I rode their butt after that, and other people was calling and posting on the sheriff's page, wanting some answers, wanting this case reopened. They finally did get 3 retired detectives, homicide detectives, that is looking into it now. They have a new coroner. She went over the previous coroner's report, but then they hired a forensic anthropologist, I think it was, someone who studies the bones and that stuff.
Yes.
So I know they did that, but I don't know what the results of that was. There's a lot of things the sheriff won't tell me now.
And I feel like if her pants were wrong side out, like I've heard, then there has to be some sort of touch DNA or something on her pants because she wouldn't have put them on the wrong way herself.
Right. And about the pants too. I think Steve, after she was murdered and until she was found 6 months later, I think he went back to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I even mentioned to the sheriff's department, to Brian Gressler, and I said, those pants, I said, an animal, if they're going to tear up something, they grab hold and they pull. It would be in pieces.
Right.
I said, but for a pair of jeans to be wrong side out, I said, there's something wrong there. And then the clasp on her bra was broken. Yeah, that's not an animal that does that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's one thing if the shoes are gone. Okay, I kind of get that theory too, that Sarah might have taken her shoes, but anyone could have found the shoes and taken them or the jacket, whatever. But to have pants on inside out is such an indicator that there should be DNA on those pants in some way.
Yeah. And, and I know the weather played a big factor in evidence.
Right.
Because it was December and then she was there till June. So you had the wet months and you had spring and then you had the heat and humidity. And that, I just wish they would have done something more. They were what I was told back then, they were getting ready to get the tracking dogs to have the tracking dogs do their thing. They didn't do it because of that phone call that Bobby made. If they would have went on ahead and did that and started at the Haney's house,
they would have
found her.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of her laying there for 6 months. And the strange thing, a few months after she disappeared, my mom, my dad, and my oldest son drove back to Kansas to put up flyers and everything. And they towed my son's car behind the motorhome. But he was out driving around looking and everything. He pulled into the cemetery but he stopped at the gates, and the headlights was shining straight down to the very back of that cemetery over by that hedgerow. That was kind of eerie. And then Frank had gone looking for her, and he was looking on the other side of the cemetery, the opposite side. And when I pulled into Kansas for her funeral, the first stop I made was that gas station in Spring Hill. I went in, get a soda, and back then there wasn't cell phones, it payphones. And the payphone's right there by the front door, which is right by the counter and the register. I called Frank to let him know we was in town and, that I had Chris and Wayne with me because I was supposed to take them over to his house. And I get to the counter to pay, and the gal said, "Are you Tanya's mom?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you know?" She goes, "Well, I just heard you talking to Frank." I said, "Okay." Then I asked her, I said, "Where's the haunted forest?" Because I think it was Scott or somebody. Scott had mentioned the haunted forest. And it was on the other side of the cemetery. I guess a bunch of kids would go there and party. But then the girl at the counter, she brought up the name Elijah.
Really? Everything just seems to point back to him for me. Yeah, him, and then the Bobby phone call, I can't shake that either. But Elijah just seems to be have gone a really dark path right before it happened. And so I just feel like he definitely is going to know some. That's why I wondered if they had an alibi for him or what his story was, that they didn't pursue him a little bit harder.
I think Scott was pursuing him, but Scott could only do so much, whatever, his boss would allow him to do. And even on his time off, he would, look into things. He would go out to the cemetery occasionally to see if something was left or anything,
Right.
Clearly, Lori believes that all the kids mentioned played a role in her daughter's murder. The one thing we can all agree on is that had the police treated Tanya's disappearance as a missing person instead of a runaway, the likelihood of solving this crime would be much higher.
Today, we're going to close up Tawnya Knight's case. Unfortunately, no earth-shattering news has come in. However, we do have our own little theories of what we think might have happened. The investigator that her mom hired, which I don't know about his theories, but he is a private investigator. He normally works with workers' comp, divorces, those type cases. He's not a murder investigator.
It was his first murder that he investigated, right?
This was the first murder, yes, that he investigated.
And we heard on that other podcast where they were like, the police officer didn't really agree with them.
Yeah, the police officers didn't really agree with them. I don't know that I really agree with some of his things. I think that oftentimes, and this happens with everyone, oftentimes that you get kind of tunnel vision on one thing and you find evidence to support what you think. And everyone by nature kind of does that. Like you decide that this is my suspect and everything that I find out needs to be pointed towards this suspect. And I think a lot of his evidence sort of did that because he decided it's these 4 people that did it. I'm going to make sure everything points to these people.
Right. And then he misses like the obvious clues that could be something else.
And you can miss obvious clues. And I'm guilty of doing that as well. Right. In some cases, I look at this suspect and that suspect, and their investigator just kind of focused in on those 4 people, and that's it. I'm going to make all my evidence go towards that. And we heard in another podcast that covered her case called Status Pending, which they did a really good job. And I would recommend if anybody wants to know more about the case to listen to their podcast, because in their podcast, they interviewed this private investigator as well as the original county sheriff's detective that was on the case. And both those interviews are really well done. So I suggest going and listening to their podcast as well. We originally started this case because we were at a true crime podcast festival and someone left a envelope on our desk that was just so random, and we don't know who left it, but it had a thumb drive in it that had her case file on it. And
I'm pretty sure it was a lady, and I think she left one at like every true crime podcast because she wanted like everyone to cover it.
Everyone to cover the case.
Well, it worked.
It worked
for us at least.
Yes, Status Pending covered it, and then we weren't going to cover it because it was covered by Status Pending. But then I thought, well, the more
and we were only
the better
focusing
for
on
this.
Indiana cases at
Right.
first.
At the time, we only focused on Indiana cases, and we try to focus on cases that haven't been covered. Then, though, somebody gave us this, so I felt like there needed to be some extra coverage of it. So we just decided to put a different spin on it. So that's why I didn't want to do interviews with the same people that Status Pending had done their interviews with. But Status Pending did do a great job, and I do suggest that people go and listen to their podcast. Now, the original county sheriff's detective, he doesn't necessarily agree with their private investigator either on a couple of things. There were a few things that he didn't agree with, but like he says, even everybody has their own opinion and everybody goes their own way with things. And if there's not a specific DNA or not anything specific that gets you a warrant to arrest someone, then there's no answers right now, so everybody should be going their own and trying to figure something out until they know for sure. But the sheriff's detective actually, they got involved and they thought that she obviously hadn't run away because she had no plan. She had no money, no clothes. What 15-year-old girl is going to leave and not take any makeup or clothes or have some sort of plan? And so they didn't
take your favorite sweater.
Right. Anything that's your favorites.
Yeah.
So you're going to take something with you. And he didn't think that she ran away, even after the uncle came forward on the 12th and said that he received that phone call that we know was bogus. They were like, yeah, I don't really think that. So they kept making those phone calls. But it was the local police department that thought that she was a runaway. So not the sheriff's office. So they were two different entities. And the uncle just kind of threw a wrench in that. Like we said before, I feel like he should be charged with obstruction of justice or something.
Messing up an investigation.
Yeah, because he messed up everything, because they could have found her earlier and
they would have had that search party, which would have made a huge difference.
Yes. And then DNA could have been recovered. There could have been other evidence around. And there's, all this time that was all, elements of from December to June in Kansas. So you're looking at winter months, spring months, into summer. So there's a lot of things that decayed, and where those couple of days made a huge difference. Now, when we talk about what we think happened, we have no way to know exactly. And this is just strictly our opinion and what we've decided that would make a good...
Makes sense in our head.
Yeah, it makes sense in our head, and it would just work well with what we've uncovered and kind of the storyline that goes along with it. And in no way are we trying to implicate people or say that this is what happened, but this is just kind of the narrative that I feel like goes along with what we've uncovered. So who wants to go first and what they think?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah. So definitely just based on what we have been given as true facts from whether police or like family members. And then what we've also uncovered about the individuals that are likely, I feel that the Elijah and Sarah had something to do with it greatly. I think Sarah found out maybe before that Tawnya was like either hooking up with him, and so she urged him to end it, and like in a strong way. That's just my like gut feeling about what we've uncovered.
Right.
I think something very similar, that Sarah and Elijah were both involved, but they didn't mean to kill her. It ended up with them going to intimidate her, to scare her into like stopping whatever she was trying to do with Elijah. And maybe they took, I still don't know how she died, but they might have taken a knife or something and they were going to like threaten her with it, just scare her off. And it just went too far. Or they tried to hold her down and accidentally smothered her. Like, either way, it was the two of them, but it was accidental and it was only meant to be a threatening situation and not for her to die.
I don't know. I feel like those would make sense, but I just have to go back to, I think it could be like just a victim of opportunity, because I just feel like they were so young and there were so many kids around that night that I feel like the truth would have come out by now. So I just think,
So you think it was just
she
a
was
stranger?
walking in the dark, and even though it's a small town and not directly on a highway or anything, it's still right by a cemetery. And who knows? I mean, even in small towns, you have people hanging out in cemeteries that aren't necessarily great people, or, you know, who knows? And I feel like someone saw her walking by herself and they took her. But then I know it doesn't really explain like the clothing that was found with her, but they didn't question these kids until 6 months later. So maybe she had borrowed clothes like earlier in the night when she was at their house, and that would explain the clothing. And I think it's so brutal. I can't picture like a 16-year-old doing it, especially together and never coming out with the truth, or like someone hearing the truth. So I just have to go with, it was random. Like someone just saw her walking and took advantage of her and killed her.
So I'm going to do a lot of thinking out loud,
Okay.
and so feel free to interject.
Amy still hasn't made up her mind.
Right.
We're just going to start talking and see what happens.
Yeah, I've made up my mind on some things, but then there's some things that are just kind of out there that I can't really put my finger on. One of the things that I haven't talked to you guys about is a girl contacted me who was telling me about some things that went on at Haney's house. And it wasn't the night that Tawnya was there, but it was during that time period. And they went to Spring Hill High School, and there were several girls that were date raped at Haney's house. And they were given different, there weren't like roofies back then, but they were given sleep medication in their drinks, and they were date raped. Now, they listed several people that were there at this time, and it was Haney, Elijah, a guy named Rudy. And that made me start thinking, well, maybe she had been drugged to some extent, and her state of mind was altered a little bit. Now, if Steve was correct when he said that Sarah and Crystal had been at Haney's house, then maybe they went there and realized Elijah was there, and Sarah was mad because she didn't know he was in town, because she
Right.
told police that he wasn't in town. And maybe she got mad and she says, we're leaving. Crystal and I are leaving and going to Shooters and Perkins, like she said. Well, if that's the case, then she was mad and she left. If not, they really just dropped Tawnya off, then Tawnya stayed and hung out with Elijah like she had planned. Now, whether or not she had a date rape drug or whatnot there, I believe that she was there to see Elijah. I believe that Steve went home at 9:00. I honestly don't believe he had anything to do with her being murdered. And where it gets iffy to me is if Elijah left the house with Tawnya or if he left and was planning to meet Tawnya somewhere. But I believe he met her in the graveyard. Now, the graveyard was not on the way home for her. It was not on the way anywhere. It wasn't on the way to Sarah's house. It was completely out of the way. So she went to the graveyard to be going to the graveyard. The part of the graveyard where she was found was on the opposite side of where you would go to party, where people went to party at the graveyard. So it was in a place where it was like off by itself, more private. So I believe that they went there to either hook up or talk. They went there for a purpose.
Right.
Now, she was wearing that T-shirt that didn't belong to her. I feel one of two things. One, that she either borrowed that T-shirt from him because girls are like that, can I have your shirt type thing. Or when he had sex with her, he got some of his DNA on her shirt and then decided I need to switch shirts. But the only thing that I think about that is
somebody would have said, no, that's definitely Elijah's shirt. Maybe.
Well, and why would his DNA not be on that shirt?
Yeah. Well, after that long of time.
I'm just thinking, though, handprints you wouldn't be thinking about that. But at the time, because you're looking at back in the 90s, you're not thinking DNA, but you would be thinking of like semen.
Oh, okay.
So you wouldn't be thinking if I just had handprints on something, but you would be thinking I shouldn't leave that on it.
It's really hard not to think allegedly of Elijah.
Yeah.
Because, and if the story is true about his shoes that were sold to...
his jacket. So then the jacket that she was wearing that night, Elijah ended up giving his girlfriend's little sister.
Right.
And then
Right. And the only other thing would be like when she was over, she left it there. And then that was that. But why didn't
he go to police and say that?
Yeah.
And he is literally the only one out of the whole group that would not go to police and give any kind of statement or answer any questions.
So we're all on the same page that we all feel he's involved.
For sure. And the only thing that stumps me out of the whole thing is the phone call. If the phone call happened, it had to be made by Sarah or some female if it actually happened. So either she was involved or she was told about it. But if so, why wouldn't she just tell? Like, if you didn't do it, if you weren't involved in some way, then why wouldn't you just tell? Now, the other thing I thought of is in her interview with police, she made a comment that in some way about Tawnya wanting to run away, that she always wanted to run away. She didn't get along with Judy. And it made me think,
just go home with her mom.
What if she made that phone call, but she didn't know at the time that she was dead, that she just did that.
Like just to try and cover for her.
Yeah, trying to cover for her. Because that's just what 16-year-olds, just if you think back to a 16-year-old brain and you think, if she was a friend of hers, and I'm just going to call and say, yeah, she's fine. She's, just kind of give her
some time
because in your brain as a 16-year-old, you would never think, oh my God, she's murdered.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, I believe it.
Right. Or the other alternative I thought was, what if it was possibly the stepsister that did because she was upset that her stepmom and her mom and her stepdad were upset and, all worried about it. And maybe she made the call to just kind of calm things down. But I think more or less,
that uncle would have known her voice.
The uncle didn't get the call.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
The uncle lied.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I know. It's one of those things, if we could only go back and be there at that time frame, and then we would, I guarantee if we looked into it with how much we look into things now, we would say, oh, there's that connection. Oh, the sister's actually friends with that person. And that's why and we'd be like, oh, that makes sense. And and we'd be like, oh, that person was in all 3 places at once. And,
to
it's
me,
just so hard.
it makes no sense that Elijah has the jacket. That's the thing that gets me is he has the jacket. He won't talk to police. That just screams guilt to me. And the other thing is it was really a crime of opportunity when it comes to where the body was located. I feel like if Sarah had done it, she had a vehicle, she would have driven her body outside of the county at least. Yeah. She would not have left her body that close to home and that close to where it was at.
Or if she could even move.
Well, on her own, yeah. But Elijah he has no vehicle. So if he kills someone, it's going to have to be within walking distance.
Yeah, I really like maybe they were partying, maybe they met there to be together, and maybe.
And again, like we said last week, what if she had told him that she was pregnant, and just saying that to try and get him to not be with Sarah anymore, and then he's like, okay, well, let's meet up at the cemetery and hang out, and then he killed her.
Or even if they were there, under the guise of hooking up, and she's like, I can't do this to Sarah. I'm going to tell her. And then he's like, no, you're not.
Have you ever wondered if the reason Sarah was so curious as to how she was killed is this, she thinks Elijah did it, and she's like, well, how bad could it possibly be type thing? Like,
oh, I would definitely be like that. I'd be like,
if you
did
think
I sleep
a boy
with
you
a
like,
killer?
Maybe did it, then you're like, but how was she killed? Like, was she just, she fell down and hit her head, or was it like a stabbing? Like, should I be afraid, or can I still date him?
Did he choke her to death, or was it like
brutal?
She fell and hit her. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Because remember, I just thought we thought that was kind of weird how I would be interested too. Obviously, I would want to know.
We would ask the same questions.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we're judging her.
I know.
We'd be like, wait, how did she die?
Just tell me. Theory, guys.
Was there 7 stabbings or was it 8?
Yes.
We would.
Yeah, I would want to know too. And the way she said it was, if it was a knife, it was probably Lee because he carried a knife. And those are things you would ask, because if it was a gun, she probably didn't know anyone that had a gun.
Yeah.
So
she was asking the right question.
And I think that's where my problem comes in with this private investigator, is that he twists every single thing that everyone says. And on the Facebook page, he really twists all the words that a 16-year-old says. And I just don't like that.
Yeah, sometimes you just got to take things at face value.
Right.
Especially from a 16-year-old.
Exactly.
They're not that sneaky.
No. And I don't mean this.
But not really.
Really, I don't mean this to sound really bad, but 16-year-old girls are not smart. I've had one, and they're just not, And
you were one.
I was, I was one.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just telling Amy earlier about this when I was 16, and my mom still has no idea. Still not going to know, Candy, but nope.
I bet they know more than you think.
I was in all kind of trouble, and I was a liar. I could look straight in your face and tell you a lie. I could probably pass a lie detector.
Do it right now.
Huh?
Tell me, do it right now.
I am a boy.
Ronnie, is that true?
He says no comment. He said no comment. I could be a really good liar. When I was little, and I used to lie to my parents all the time. I love you, Mom. And it was just, it came natural. It was so easy to lie to them because I would lie all the time to get out of the house.
I'm a terrible liar. I
was really good at it. You can ask.
I have
my
no
mom.
comment.
I was really good at it.
I'm still too close.
Yeah. I was good at it. And kids that do bad things are good at it. And that's why I was really good at it. And so that's why I think about these kids is they could be good liars, but to have that many involved, kind of like you said, somebody is going to slip up. Somebody's going to say something. And if you murder someone, you can't tell anyone. That's rule number 1 in murder. Not that I'm giving a lesson.
Well, Amy. She just said she's a good liar. And the first rule is you don't talk about murder.
Don't talk about murder. Yeah.
All right.
What's rule in Murder Club?
Amy, who did you murder?
I can't talk
Come on,
about it.
I just want to solve a case. Can it be
talk
yours?
About it. No, can't.
Come on.
So I want to go back to one thing. You said that they were drugging them with sleeping pills and stuff, allegedly. What if Tawnya accidentally overdosed? The dump was a cover-up, and they don't want to admit that that she was drugged.
It is a possibility. However, that's a long way to carry a dead body. You know, it's hard to think that kids would be able to pick up a body and carry it that far. And the coroner ruled it as homicide. So I don't think it would have just been toxicology of sleeping medication or...
Danny raised a good point. Mom saw her leave and walk away on her own.
Yes. The mom at the house said that she walked away. Now, Steve said in his interview that the mom said Elijah left with her. And Haney had also said that Elijah left with her. Now, if that's the case, that's just another point for Elijah.
Yeah. Well,
Not
and
a good
didn't Steve say that Elijah like came over and showered and left?
Yep.
Yes.
So
now
we're going to
was
call
it
them guilt
before-
flags. There's so many guilt flags now.
there are lots of guilt flags. Now, that could be one of two ways as well, because he said that he thought it was probably right before midnight. And if she left home to go home around midnight, did he go to his house and shower before he met her there because he was planning on going to be with her? Or did he go shower after he murdered her, allegedly?
Yeah, but 6 months later, around midnight, is like, okay, that was actually
Right.
an hour before.
That was probably two.
and this was an hour after.
Yeah.
type thing.
I remember calling my PO officer at 9, and then
It was late.
I
but
knew
was
I fell
awake.
asleep at 3:15.
Yes.
It's
Every time in between, that's a 6-hour gap.
So
It's
why
around
would he
midnight.
leave Haney's house, go to Steve's to take a shower, and then go to somebody else's house to spend the night?
You want it?
You wouldn't.
Unless.
What? Yeah, unless you went to the graveyard and murdered someone in between,
Yeah.
Possibly.
allegedly.
Is he? Did we ever find him?
Yeah, he lives in Topeka with his wife and kids.
But no Facebook.
And some people say that if you have kids, that it would make you want to confess because you would know what it would feel like to lose a child. I think opposite.
No, I think the
think-
exact opposite.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you have kids, then you would never
Never.
confess
Yeah.
because you don't want to be taken away from your children. So I think at this point, you're going to have to find someone else that knows about it, that he's told in the past. Like if that phone call was made by Sarah, she needs to lawyer up, get immunity, and tell what she knows. Or you're going to have to find some DNA in whatever was left by some miracle of God, because there's no way he's going to tell at this point if it was him.
Find that murder weapon.
Yeah.
Any way that you can get your hands on the autopsy report?
I doubt that.
I don't think it's
After-
out to the public. So
After the private investigator went in and then displayed all the records to the public, I don't think that they're going to release anything else to
but
anybody.
it's always that thing like, well, it's not going anywhere, so you need to do something. Like, who cares
Right.
at this point? I mean,
Right.
unless don't like obviously throw the case so that you can't say someone's guilty, but let it out because somebody's going to know something that maybe they don't. Obviously,
right.
obviously, because they don't
People
know.
can still come forward. I mean, I feel like the girl that contacted me that said, hey, people were date raped at this house, that's information that needs to be known because that's something pretty significant.
Mhm.
And she also talked about how people smoke pot all the time over there. So there's that combination of people getting high and whatnot. And it is true that you can take your clothes off if you are hypothermic. You know, that is something that happens. The police originally said something about that they thought maybe she went out, she got hypothermic and took her own
I
clothes
checked
off.
the weather that day, and she wouldn't, even if she couldn't have been out that long. It wasn't that cold, even for like 2 days.
Right.
So she couldn't even have been drugged, drunk, confused, and still gotten that cold. The weather was, I mean, it is Kansas in the winter, but it's not hypothermia cold.
Well, you also can't mysteriously lose your shoes and your jacket
Yeah.
when you take
and then
them
they
off.
show up.
Yeah, and they show up in
2
Topeka.
different places.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that's why I can't get behind that at all. But if anybody knows anything else about this case at all, then they're encouraged to call Johnson County Sheriff's Department. It's a tip line. It's 816-474-TIPS, TIPS. You can remain anonymous. If you don't want to contact police, you can send us a message. We can be the go-between.
Where do you stand on Tanya's murder? Let us know via social media. Cold Case Chronicles on Facebook and Instagram, and at Cold Case Crew on Twitter. And as always,
Have the day you deserve.
Especially if you killed Tawnya Knight.
I know your secrets and I'm telling on you.